Hello, first graders. Happy Wednesday again. All right, so we're continuing, and actually, we're going to be finishing up reading this fantastic book we've been reading for many weeks in first grade, the book about continents and countries and maps. And so we've established that this is a nonfiction book, which means the author's purpose is to teach us about continents and countries and maps. And we've been looking at the different continents. We know that there are 7 continents. Last week we finished reading up about North America. We read about South America. Earlier this week we read about Europe. And yesterday we read about 2 continents. We read about Africa and Asia. So today we're going to read about the final 2 continents, Australia and Antarctica. So the purpose of the author writing this book was to teach us about those continents and to really help us get the details into our head. That's why we're reading this, is to learn those details and get them in our brains for the rest of our lives. So it's always good to go back and just quickly refresh our memory about what we learned last time. So yesterday we read that Africa was the 2nd largest continent in the world. We learned there were 54 countries and that they spoke over 1,500 languages. We learned that Africa had the largest desert in the world, the Sahara Desert, which goes from the west to the east. We learned that below the Sahara Desert, the rainforest, including Tanzania, where Jane Goodall worked with the chimpanzees. And then we learned that Africa has the longest river in the world, the Nile River, which starts up here by the Mediterranean Sea in Egypt and goes all the way down into the center of Africa. So we learned about the city of Luxor, which is in Egypt. There's Luxor. We learned about the city of Cape Town in South Africa. Okay. We learned, here's a picture of the Nile River and the Sahara Desert. We learned that the tallest mammals in the world, the giraffe, lives in Africa, and Mount Kilimanjaro is the tallest mountain in Africa. All right, so you could probably hear my daughter is actually having a voice lesson. I didn't anticipate that she'd be quite so loud, so I'm actually going to go shut the door, so bear with me. 1 second. All right. So, first graders, in a way, homeschooling with Mr. B is kind of like when we're at school and we have to shut the class door if kids are being loud in the hall. In this case, my daughter was being loud with her singing, but I don't want to stop her from singing, so I just shut the door. All right, so then we went on to learn about Asia, which is the largest continent in the world. It has 48 countries, over 2,000 languages. We learned that Asia has Russia, which covers both Europe and Asia. So it's got the country with the biggest size, but it's also got the country with the most people. So China is the biggest country in the world in terms of population. India is the 2nd biggest country in the world in terms of population. So if you think about it, in Russia, we say thank you, we say spasiba balshaya. In China, we say xie xie. In India, we say shukriya. And here's Japan over here next to China. In Japan, we say domo arigato. We learned that the smallest country in Asia, the Maldives, an island country south of India. We learned about the longest river in China, the Yangtze River. We learned about the pandas who live in China. right? We learned that the highest mountain in the world, Mount Whoa, that was the wind blew the door shut. Sorry about that. Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world, is up in Nepal, which is between India and China. Okay. The largest lake in the world is called the Caspian Sea, and it's over there by Russia. Caspian Sea, even bigger than Lake Michigan or Lake Superior. So there's the bamboo forests where the pandas live. Then we learned about Tokyo, the capital city of Japan, again where they say domo arigato. We learned about how in springtime in Japan people celebrate cherry blossoms. So right about now they're beginning to celebrate cherry blossoms. We also learned about a city in India called Udaipur, which is called the City of the Lakes. It's a beautiful walled Indian city. People come from all over the world to see Udaipur. All right, so excuse me, now we can go to Chapter 7, Australia and Antarctica. The country of Australia is an island and a continent. It is the smallest of all the continents. So remember we read that Europe was the second smallest? Well, now we know the smallest is Australia. It's a small continent, but it's still a big country because it's the 6th largest country in the world. So you've got Russia, you've got China, Canada, the United States, Brazil are all bigger than Australia, but Australia is still among the biggest countries in the world, but it's the smallest continent. The capital of Australia is, the name of that capital city is called Canberra. So here's a map of Australia. You can see it's land surrounded by water, so it's an island. Canberra is down here in the southeast part of Australia. A large part of Australia is a hot, dry desert called the Outback, right? So if you've ever been to Outback Steakhouse, which I love, well, that is named after the Outback in Australia. And guess what they like to eat in Australia? Steak, just like the United States. They call it the Outback Steakhouse. Because of this desert, Australia does not have a large population, and most people in Australia live near the coast. Okay, so does that remind you of another country we learned about that's really big but doesn't have many people living in it? You bet it. It reminds me of Canada. Also big country, not too many people in Canada. All right, so guess what? The cats opened the door, and now you can hear my daughter again. So hold on a sec. I'm going to shut the door again. Come on, kitties. All right, those naughty putty tats. All right, so when you look at the map of Australia, there are some symbols that show you some of the other things that Australia is famous for. The Great Barrier Reef, the biggest coral reef. They call it it's like the Amazon rainforest of the ocean. In both the Amazon rainforest and the Great Barrier Reef, a big percentage of all the animals that live on Earth and the plants come from those two places, the Amazon rainforest and the Great Barrier Reef. Also in Australia, we know they're very famous for their kangaroos, koala bears. They have lots of interesting snakes, duckbill platypus. There's some more koalas. So let's read the words to see if they match up with the picture. It says Australia is surrounded by the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean.